who are descendants of the Europeans, tend to measure time from European events. When we got here, when this queen or that king gave us a deed for this piece of property or that piece of property. And we forget that there were whole communities of people living here for thousands of years, very happily, doing very well.
The story of Bayshore is the story of its people. From its earliest beginnings until today, it has served a remarkably diverse population who have paid witness to its vibrant and unique history. Over the past 3 centuries, Bayshore has been called home by farmers, fishermen, the very rich and the very poor. Yet it all starts with one people, the Sekataw. Theirs was the first community to settle along the shores of the Great South Bay. They called their home Panatequit, Indian for Crooked Creek, and spent the seasons hunting in its woodlands and fishing the vast bodies of water that provided food throughout the year. But change was on the horizon. Settlers from across the Atlantic were making their way to America. In the late 17th century, John Mowbray, a Scottish emigrant, came to the township of Islip by way of Southampton. In 1701, he traded with the Sekataw, giving them eel spears for the world that was their home.
He would be a yeoman farmer, probably from a well-off family, although not the firstborn. Don't forget, in England was governed by primogeniture, which means that the firstborn gets everything. The other sons in a line of inheritance would get nothing. When North America came along, those were the people that were hopping on the boats and coming over here. The air was abuzz in England with opportunity here, great climate, all those things that bring people to start a real estate boom, so to speak. But John Mowbray was a yeoman farmer. He arrived here prepared to farm. There were 2 great things going for the agricultural settlers like John Mowbray. One was that we had a mild climate. The other thing was the bounty of the Great South Bay. They could supplement their diets with wonderful shellfish. So it was really a land of milk and honey. There wasn't like tons of people arriving here, towns springing up and all that. It went on quite uneventfully for 150 years or so.
Mowbray had no real plans to develop the area. He had come to farm. But Bayshore was on the Montauk Highway, a colonial thoroughfare well-traveled for its time. And its main street, then known as South Country Road, became home to early merchants and a point of destination for neighboring communities.
300 years is a long time. Bayshore has seen many changes, but the one thread that held the community together was its main street, which had been in existence since Revolutionary War and really began to develop in the 18th century.
Bayshore is unique in the sense that it did develop into a mercantile or retail center, really from its start. The local farmers would come in, as was the pattern throughout America, on weekends, take off a half a day on Saturday and come into town and purchase everything they would need for the week and go back out to their farms, maybe go to a dance and some sort of entertainment, stay overnight, go to church.
There were 3 general stores on Main Street, and they sold everything that the people did not grow themselves because the farms were pretty much self-sufficient at the time. They also cut cordwood. There was 2 sawmills here, and they cut the wood and shipped it off to Manhattan and brought back things from Manhattan. They brought back bricks from the Hudson River to build some of the areas here.
And there was a fair amount of development. That's when the cranberry bogs and the farms then became cottages. And they were for summer folks, but also for people who were coming here to settle because it was a center of commerce for the South Shore.
Less than 150 years after John Mowbray's arrival, Bayshore had gone from a population of 1 to 2,000. South Country Road was becoming so well traveled that a small inn was erected by Felix Dominy, a young lighthouse keeper, who built his establishment from the wood of old shipwrecks. Dominy's vision was a harbinger of what was to come.
By the middle of the 19th century, Bayshore was still a sleepy town, but by that time it had already established its own first schoolhouse, its post office, its firehouse, and 3 churches.
Then Bayshore made a huge transformation from being a village to a boomtown. And there were 2 things that led to that. One was the end of the Civil War. So just like the end of any war, people come home. They want to buy a home, they want to raise a family, have children. So we saw a real influx of the population here. 2, the Long Island Railroad came.
And that was really like people arriving here from Mars. It was that big a cataclysmic change in Bayshore's history. It connected Bayshore and Long Island with New York City, and it changed everything. Up until then, farms were fairly self-sufficient out here. A farmer would work hard with his family and just make enough to get by on, maybe a little left over to sell around. But now they could really make bucks and sell their produce to the city. The other way the railroad changed things is that people from the city, it didn't take them long to look around out here and say, hey, this is really beautiful.
So this is when the media moguls and the titans of industry settled in Bayshore. It was the Hamptons of its time. There was a sportsman's club. There were yacht clubs.
There were horse races here. There were polo games by the men that lived here and owned horses, the Belmonts, the Havemeyers.
The world's most famous suffragette lived here, Alva Belmont Vanderbilt. They had a summer home here. And it was right at the time when women were trying to get the right to vote. And she was a very vocal advocate for that. And she lived in Bayshore.
But Bayshore was also home to Native Americans, the Poospatuck and the Shinnecock, who came off reservations from the east, as well as African Americans, freedmen and women who found work at the hotels and great estates that were springing up throughout Bayshore.
There were jobs. Many estates were being developed in the latter part of the 19th century, and all kinds of people worked in those estates.
My grandfather came off the Shinnecock Reservation. His father was a coachman on the Charles Lawrence Estate, which is located in West Islip.
My uncle, James Jackson, was a chef at the Cortlandt House. And my brother, Duke, was a chauffeur for Mrs. Dominy. And this is why our home looks so attractive, because when Mrs. Dominy was changing her, whatever you call it, decoration, my brother got first pick.
The Dominys were just one of several families who would develop Bayshore into a resort town. Clinton Avenue was established by 2 brothers, Nathaniel and Hallett Clark. And on Ocean Avenue, Commodore Rogers opened the famous Prospect House.
Once the railroad was constructed and made the spectacular natural beauty of Bayshore accessible to New York, early families and developers built hotels and fine residential developments to house the Manhattan elite.
In its heyday, Main Street had a lot of hotels, very big. The Hotel Linwood, the Domini House, the Prospect Hotel, which was basically the length of Ocean Avenue between Main Street and the Great South Bay. That was the big one. That was like a 200-room hotel. The New York Times reported the names of the guests. Every week, every 2 days, there'd be another article about the names of the people that came and spent some time over at the Prospect House.
By the turn of the century, Bayshore had become a playground for the rich and famous. Egbert Benjamin opened Benjamin's Beach, known as one of the finest bathing beaches on the South Shore. Main Street had a variety of fine shops that spilled over onto the side streets, and an opera house that showed silent films and staged plays. Then in 1916, the Vitagraph studio came to town, bringing the glamour of the movie industry with it.
Well, the movie industry at that time was very small. It was just building up. It started in Brooklyn, and Vitagraph was one of the big motion picture companies at the time. And filming started in the area. The earliest record that I see is around 1913, when the Eclectic Film Company came out, and they had, for The Perils of Pauline, Bayshore was listed as one of its filming locations.
Right on 4th Avenue was the Vitagraph building, which still stands, and that was converted to be a set with very high ceilings for the making of some of those early movies. Anita Stewart was the sweetheart of the Vitagraph company.
Vitagraph was an international film company. I'm not sure how many people are aware of that. They had distribution networks all over the place. They were in every country. So Anita Stewart was a huge star. She made $4,000 a week in 1915. That was her salary at the time, which was unheard of. But this created a lot of work for the people in Bayshore.
People who were extras were from Bayshore, and they were paid quite a lot of money at that time for just a few minutes' work. Then the people could come on a Friday night to the Carlton Opera House, and they could see these skits or photo plays, and they were in them, and of course that was great.
Vitagraph's residency in Bayshore was short-lived. By 1917, they pulled up stakes and headed west to Los Angeles, which was replacing New York as the center of the film industry. But the residents of Bayshore barely noticed. Their world was constantly expanding. By 1920, they had an organized fire department, a library on Main Street, and a thriving Jewish community who developed the downtown area. To meet the needs of a growing population, a young renegade doctor, George S. King, built an extension on his home on Maple Avenue and opened Bayshore's first hospital. Less than 2 years later, another healthcare facility, the Southside Hospital, would open, anchoring Main Street to the east. But the most significant change would be the end of the estate era. With World War I raging in Europe, young men who worked the estates were leaving to fight, and a newly established income tax caused many estate owners to close up their homes and go. But in their wake, they left a new class of citizen, the workers and their families, who would now become the new settlers of Bayshore and who would give birth to an even more diverse community.
My father's people came from Germany, and they settled in Ohio, and from Ohio to Long Island. And I don't know how they met, my mother and father, but they were married, came to Bayshore in a horse and buggy, and settled here.
My grandmother on my father's side emigrated from Ireland at the turn of the century. And she used to tell us stories about on Sundays after going to church, the middle class or lower class people would gather on Main Street and wait for the wealthy people to come from church. And it was a treat for the people to stand on the sidelines and kind of watch the wealthy go by. But they did it in groups. The German boys would stand on the corner of Fifth Avenue and Main Street, and the Irish girls would stand on Ocean Avenue and Main Street. And my grandmother tells about seeing my grandfather for the first time during one of those parades, as it were.
My father was an Italian grocery peddler, born in Sicily, and I'm pretty sure he got here due to the fact that other people from the same town were located in Bayshore.
During the early 20s, my grandfather had business on Long Island. He was in the bakery business in Brooklyn, and traveling to and from Brooklyn to Patchogue and some other towns to the east, he passed through Bayshore.
My grandfather is originally from Richmond, Virginia, and he and my grandmother, they were in Harlem for a couple of years. Two of their children were born there before they came out to Bayshore. Why he came out to Bayshore, I'm not really sure. I'm not even sure if any of my other relatives know, other than the fact that he wanted to give his children a decent way of life, a decent upbringing.
Bayshore had diversity, but the cultures rarely mixed. Instead, they formed their own communities, mirroring the larger cities where neighborhoods were comprised of one ethnic group.
As a child in Bayshore, I wasn't allowed to go more than a block or two. That would be a whole different area. The town was pretty well broken into sections. We had Irish Town, which was north of the Sunrise. The area by the gas company was the Polish area.
Our neck of the woods was Harrison Avenue and Harrison Place.
It was all black families here. Very close, and everybody on the street knew each other. And it was a very nice locale.
And you'd see all these little homes, well kept for the most part, little homes there.
The houses, they had little flower boxes, and they were quaint looking, but I thought they were beautiful and well kept. The people took pride in their homes, and they kept them up.
You'd find friendly faces, people who just liked people. And we had sometimes street preaching, Sometimes we had block parties, Sometimes we had getting together on holidays and everybody bringing their own food and all sharing it together down the alley. We had all of that. That was part of us.
We did have a strong Jewish community. Most of the merchants in local businesses were owned by Jewish people for the most part. Everybody had a very friendly feeling and dealt with them with the idea that they were the merchants and they were good for the town.
The Jewish community was thriving. In fact, stores used to close on Main Street for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Men's shops, jewelry stores, furniture shops, the hardware store, the fabric store, and they literally closed. It's not like they went to synagogue and left the stores open. They closed on the first 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur.
With its downtown being developed by Jewish merchants and its first black business owner, James T. Jonathan, a photographer whose shop on Union Boulevard was frequented by a multiracial clientele, Bayshore became a target for supremacists who were on the rise throughout Long Island.
When I was in high school, I stood on the corner of Ocean Avenue and Main Street, and I watched the parade. And the parade was something that I think very few people know or remember at this time. But The parade was the Ku Klux Klan marching down Main Street. 4 men in robes and on white horses, and followed by, maybe 100, 150. And the followers were really the people who settled in Bayshore originally. They were mostly the fishermen, mostly the clam diggers, the sort of local people. They were the ones that at that time supported the Klan to the point where they burned crosses on the dock where my father was in business on Ocean Avenue. They burned crosses on the lawn of St. Patrick's Church.
My aunt and I were coming from, she was visiting her sister here on Harrison Avenue. We lived on 5th Avenue. We were going through Perkle Street next to the houses that was there where the school is now, and there was a cross burning. A cross burning. My aunt grabbed my hand and we ran. We ran from there right straight through over to 5th Avenue. We were living on 5th Avenue.
The Klan was a phenomenon during its time. We always associate it with the Deep South, when in fact they were pretty active here in the North as well. They recruited members from churches using money or the gift of flags to get entree and to speak to the congregation. And that's where they got their members on the pretext of turning away the loose morals of the flapper era of the 20s. It was also a time during Prohibition, and they rallied against the rum runners and the speakeasies and had a message of temperance that really resonated with churches. I have one of the early ledgers from the history of the church. This one's dated April 12, 1932. It covers some of the mundane things, the minutes of the meetings in which they decide to donate flowers to a bereaved family. But right here in the bottom of the notes it says, a request came from the Ku Klux Klan that a meeting of the Klan be held with the church. Now, this was a significant time in Bayshore's history. The Grand Cyclops of the Klan lived in Bayshore. While it didn't have a lot of members, maybe 20 to 25,000 members in all of Long Island, it was a very active group. So here comes the Klan to Bayshore United Methodist Church, and it was brought to the board for a vote. The minutes continue and say, on a motion, it was voted that the request be denied.
We weren't the same as our brothers and sisters in the South. We've always been able to vote. We've always had, our schools have been integrated, always. Oh, we've had discrimination here. I wouldn't be so silly to not say that. Of course we have had it. But as far as going in the stores and all of that, oh yeah, no, we were never discriminated against, nothing like that.
There was never any like segregation or anything. It was really great. And 2 of my best friends were Hazel and Latha Brown. And then we had another girl, Julia Cuffey, was a riot on the baseball team.
And we shared our families, our houses, our activities together. It was diverse, but it was never envisioned as diverse. We all just felt that we were the same kind of guys and gals.
Relationship was very good, very good. Of course, there was always 1 or 2 that had their nose up in the air, but we seemed to have got along. We had our little fights and whatnot, but as a whole, it was very harmonious.
Well, would kids visit each other's home, or is that where it would end in school?
No, that's where it ended in school. No, yeah. If we went to Brightwaters and everything, we was up there doing some, like cutting the lawns or working around the yards or doing something like that. The kids didn't. Very few of them, unless you were a football star. They catered to the football stars.
We had a couple of black students there, one of which was one of my favorite people, Eddie Cornelius, who was a wonderful athlete. Basketball, he played football, he was a drummer. His father had a small band who, by the way, played for my wedding. And one of the reunions, he said something to me about, you know, we never really mixed. We never really mixed. I said, what do you mean? You know, you came to all the reunions, we had a good time, kept in touch with you. He said, but did you ever invite me over to your house? So I said, no, I guess I didn't. But there's a lot of other people that I didn't ask either. You know, just weren't moving in the same circles. There were other friends that I had that weren't part of our core group, so to speak. But that's where it was.
We had some very good friends on Roosevelt, right around the corner from where we lived on 3rd Avenue, the Prudentes and the Legios. We were in and out their houses all the time. We were very good friends. But however, when you move past that and you move to the richer section, I guess it was the richer section, I know now it was the richer section, then we realized that there was a big difference.
Our school had a unique system. We had an assistant principal who determined what type of an education we would get. So there was either an academic course program or a business course program in your last 4 years of high school. And he determined which one you would take by your financial status. Now, if he thought your family didn't have any means of you ever going to college, or you didn't have the aptitude, you didn't take sciences and the maths necessary to go to college. You took business courses, bookkeeping, typing, business arithmetic, things of that nature. So our lives were diverted in this sense, not because we wanted to be, it's the way we were directed.
The differences between people was not based on, as far as I know, was not based on whether you're black or white, but how much money you had. There were people who were the rich people that lived in that area. Well, they didn't socialize with the poor people who lived on the other side of the tracks. But the guys on the other side of the track could be any kind, any color, any religion or whatever. And I guess that part hasn't changed much. But as far as between the black and the white and so on, there was no sign saying black can go here, the whites go there. They didn't have any of that, which they had in the South, of course. But Bayshore? Nah.
Over 250 years had passed since John Mowbray had staked his claim in Bayshore. Then it was Anglo-Americans, mixed with natives who lived here. Now it was home to a vast population of citizens who wanted to settle out of the cities and raise their families in a small community. In pre-World War II America, Bayshore was still small-town USA.
It was kind of not a suburb as we have nowadays. It was more of almost a farm type of community, in that you had a lot of open land, a lot of lakes.
I rode my bicycle between Sekataw Manor and where the bridge is. There was nothing.
Oh, it was the country. And I think everybody had a dog or a cat. Everybody had a garden. Everybody raised some other animals other than the garden. I know my father always had chickens.
What is now known as Okanee, just west of Bayshore, that was all just open land. And while I was still in high school, they were grazing cattle there. And that was all just grazing land. So the farms really were just outside the main town.
And there were dairies all over the place. Up where the Fifth Avenue School is now, there was a dairy up there. Where the middle school is was a tremendous dairy. Nelson. As a matter of fact, Nelson had a manufacturing plant where they process the milk brought in by these different cow owners.
Good girl. What a good girl.
And these dairymen would deliver it to your door.
We had merchants coming to our door every day, especially in the summer. They would come and they would be carrying their ware of vegetables, of fish, of you name it. They came and they brought it right to our door. And living so close to the bay, you could just go down there and catch all the fish you wanted.
Bayshore was a great fishing stop. And when my father finally moved to Ocean Avenue, he bought a place, it was a combination grocery store, soda fountain, and candy store. But his primary business was booking fishing parties. And there were 42 boats there, all under contract to him. He didn't own any of them, but he booked all of them for the people coming out from New York to fish. And at that time, fishing in the Great South Bay was phenomenal.
It was a beautiful bay. There were only maybe a dozen boats bigger than 20 feet. And my father, who was a fisherman, he knew every boat. When you went out into the bay to catch weak fish or fluke or dig some clams or whatever, you'd see other boats and he would know exactly who they were. Olin Brewster and Verizers and, oh gosh. And he'd know what they were doing and where they were.
Didn't have too much of a life on the bay. We went to the bay. I was very fortunate. My mother knew how to drive, and my mother had a car. I think a lot of the women at that time didn't drive, or they only had one car in the family, but we were very fortunate. And my mother would take us to Islip Beach. So we did get a chance to get away from the local area from time to time.
All the boys around here, myself included, we were bicycle freaks. We rode on bicycles everywhere, especially down to the beach. We had a nice little spot down on Saxon Avenue where was our swimming place. They would go down there in crowds and everything. We would have it was nice. And it was like a community fair. Everybody, it was mixed. And there was no problems. We all enjoyed ourselves.
One of the big things I remember was Benji's Beach, which now is covered over by the Bayshore Marina. It was a beach that you had to join. We had lockers, and there was a pier that went from the main building out into the bay. And at the end of that pier, there was a slide, almost 2-story high slide. And the kids that wanted to swim in the beach club, but whose parents couldn't join, would jump in the water at the end of Clinton Avenue and swim out to the end of the pier and come up the stairs very surreptitiously and then saunter into the beach and dive in. And I'm sure a lot of people will remember that group that did that.
And we all spent summertime all day long at the beach. And they had a handball court and a swimming pool there, and it was great. Lockers. It was a big place then.
There were lessons during the summer, so we all went there for the summer to Benjamin Beach for the lessons, the swimming lessons. Well, I never learned how to swim. My sisters and my brother did. But I was baptized in Benjamin's Beach. Yeah, my church baptized there, and I was baptized there.
The winters, when we were in high school, that was about 1930, 31, seemed to be more severe than they are now. And the lakes at Ocean Avenue, and there was a lake where the Ford place is today, they froze over early. So you could almost count on ice skating by Thanksgiving.
I used to be able to walk across the street, and there was sort of a small, tiny area that froze next to where the Masonic Temple is, between there and Lanier Lane. But the big event was going to Kelly's Lake, and all of our friends met there, and we would have hot chocolate afterwards.
And my father, who worked in construction, was very often home because he couldn't work. He would go over to the lake with a shovel and clear an area for us to skate, because you couldn't skate on the snow. But eventually, the guys would come with their hockey sticks and their sticks to make goals, and they would get a hockey game going. So that was the end of it for us who just wanted to skate. But it was a chance to see the guys, so that wasn't so bad either.
The decade before World War II was an innocent time for America, but in Bayshore, change was already on the horizon.
By the start of the Second World War, Bayshore was on the verge of tremendous change. The downtown area was booming. There was a Sears and Roebuck on Main Street and 2 movie theaters, the Regent and the palatial Bayshore Theater. New York's first $1 million high school was erected on 3rd Avenue. But nothing would prepare Bayshore for the end of World War II.
After World War II, we had many veterans coming, and there was a real resurgence of the boom in house building.
Thousands and thousands of troops were coming home from the war, many of them already married or about to get married, and literally having nowhere to live. New York burst its seams. And where did people come? Well, generally people from Brooklyn and Queens came out to Nassau and Suffolk.
After the Second World War, Bayshore became a boom town, growing from 6,000 to 12,000 people. All kinds of people came to Bayshore, making it their world, and it was a good world.
Bayshore was the biggest town east of Freeport. There was no bigger town than Bayshore, because we had all the leading stores here, don't forget.
Beautiful street. It was a very beautiful street. They called it the Miracle Mile. It was the biggest thing in Suffolk County.
Bayshore is a bustling town. I mean, if you went down to Morris Friedman's, that was a super Sears Roebuck of its day.
Oh, Morris Friedman, sure. He was in a bicycle store and a Bayshore men's shop. We know them all. And that big Schneider's, Freistad's Pharmacy, and the Nedox Pharmacy, Entenmann's Bakery. Mrs. Entenmann used to wrap your buns for you.
In those days, people had retail stores with a display window. If there were shoes, if it was a shoe store, there would be shoes in the store window. If it was a clothing store, there would be suits and ties and what have you in the window. If they sold bicycles, you would see a bicycle in the show window, and that's where you bought your things.
You know, it was like the Sears and Roebuck catalog was the wishing book, you know. All your dreams were in that catalog, but you couldn't get them. You could only see them, but you couldn't touch them, you know. So that's what Main Street was like. I guess your girls looked in the window and said, look at that beautiful dress and skirt and all of these type of things.
From the North Bayshore perspective, it was like we were walking into an upscale area when we would come to Main Street.
We used to go to Freistad's drugstore. My aunt liked a black and white soda, and she didn't have kids, so she would take, that was an outing. And she wore gloves on Main Street to Lozier's. I remember wanting a velvet dress or something when I was 9 or 10.
Oh, we got a jewelry store there, Goldie's. I'll never forget their motto, buy and pay the Goldie's way, you know. And to look at all the glitz in the window, you know, and neon signs. It was just, it's almost like going to Times Square, I guess, when you're a kid.
People would spend a day in Bayshore, and they would go shopping, and they would go into all the shops. There was a lot of antiques. People would buy clothes, products. The best pizza around was in the Bayshore Pizza Parlor down there. It was just a center of activity.
I was allowed as a child to ride my three-wheeler, so I had to have been young, down to Main Street, down Shore Lane to Main Street, check out the fire department, hang out at the fire department. There was a fellow who used to always sit in front of the fire department, Mickey. I'm sure many of the firemen will remember him. Smoked a pipe. He'd squat and he would have conversations. He was just a town character. Ride my bike down to Enneman's Bakery. There was a varnished screen door. I would open that, look in, and sort of begging, and Mrs. Entenman was very kind. She'd give me a sugar cookie.
The merchants knew us. See, they knew us by name, and they knew what family we belonged to.
You went into the stores, and almost everybody who worked in the store was somebody that you knew.
Well, I would say this, that if you walked up into the village of Bay Shore, you would know everyone that was there.
Well, you'd walk downtown, and without a word of exaggeration, you'd know 75% of the people and say hello to, and they'd know you.
My ambition in life, I guess my whole thing to being a millionaire was owning a car. So, but to be able to go down to Main Street with a car when you were 17, wow, you know.
There was a summer when I got to use my brother's convertible. We used to, myself and my two best friends used to get into the car and drive back and forth down and up Main Street with our hands out like this, because we knew every single car that passed us and every shopkeeper, and we would just hold our hand up there because everybody knew us.
I used to go every Saturday to the Regent Theater, every Saturday. There wasn't a Saturday that we kids didn't go.
5 acts of vaudeville plus the movie. And we'd go to the afternoon, go in for a quarter, and sometimes we'd know the usher, he'd let us in the side door. It was great. And then they'd have the movies have serials where you'd have to go next week to see what's going on.
It used to be Gene Autry's series where, and they were series, and at the end of each particular program, the wagon would be going off the cliff, and you had to come back next Saturday to see what happened when the wagon went off the cliff. And there were a number of those type of series movies.
I remember when I was young coming to the Regent Theater, and and I remember the movie. It was the premiere of the movie Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and Betty Davis was in the Bayshore Theater, and she came, and I forget who her co-star was, but whoever her co-star was in that movie, and they came, and that was actually the first horror movie I had ever seen. I had nightmares for months because somebody's hand got cut off there, and I couldn't handle it at that age. But I remember, you know, to have stars of that nature coming to Bayshore, that was something big. Bayshore, to me, was, you know, really where everything was happening.
There was 2 movies, the Bayshore movie, which is now the YMCA building. They left part of it there, but it was a beautiful, beautiful theater, plush. You'd go into the ladies' room just so you could feel that you were hobnobbing with the rich, because they had velour couches and wall-to-wall carpeting and beautiful lamps.
It was just a classy, beautiful theater. It had a big lobby that you would walk into.
And it had a great stage with a chandelier in the middle of the theater that was, oh. In fact, we'd have fear of sitting underneath it in case it should ever fall. It would kill all the kids in the neighborhood.
I think the last movie I saw there was a James Bond movie or so. Yeah, that's where we'd go with the kids. And Freistat's was a drugstore but had a soda fountain. After the movies, you'd go to Freistat's. I'm sure we could all reminisce about all the families that that were local, pizza place that were there, you know, where we knew the owners directly and you dealt with them for years. And my wife's born and grew up in Bayshore, so she reminisces even further back than that. But it's changed drastically since then.
Bayshore was a model of progress, but progress came with a painful price.
The bay was loaded with ducks, which we don't see the flocks of ducks that we had at that time. And in foggy weather, very foggy, wet weather in November, December, in the wintertime, you could be going along with a ferry and come into a flock of ducks that didn't see you approaching right away. And they would take off, and it looked like rain underneath them when so many of them took off that the water coming off their feet and their feathers would be dropping. And it was unusual to see maybe 1,000 ducks go up in the air at one time. And I'm not out there sailing it anymore, but I understand they're not prevalent. They're not here anymore, and the clammers aren't here anymore.
There were clam diggers digging clams out of small skiffs, and I remember the sound of their engines was a single cylinder, whatever, like a lawnmower motor, and you'd hear them putting away, and they'd go out early in the morning and come back. In those days, you could make a living digging clams out of the bay.
In the wintertime, the best clamming would be right out here in Bayshore Cove, right outside of the marina, which the marina wasn't there then. But when they opened up that area in December, that would be wall-to-wall clam boats. The clamming was so productive in that area.
You took clams for granted because no matter where you went, you could walk on the bottom and dig up clams with your toes, which we did many times. And I remember at the end of Connecticut Avenue in the bay, there's a little sandy area, which is now just on the exit of the Bayshore Marina as you go out into the bay. And soft clams were growing there. Ipswich clams, soft clams, pisser clams, whatever you want to call them, little. And I don't think there's a soft clam in all of Long Island today. Scallops were in the bay. Oh, Lord. Don't start me thinking about that. It's long gone.
Down now where Newlands Fort is was what we called Kelly's Lake. That was all a lake with fish in it, and in the winter it would freeze and we'd skate.
Kelly's Lake was a big deal, even all the way into when I was almost a teenager. I don't know when that became a parking lot.
Nowadays we measure progress in blacktop and concrete, but all of a sudden one day trucks came in and filled in half the lake, and now it's a parking lot. And it was a beautiful lake. It was right on the road, so when you drove through town you saw the lake. They just filled it in.
I became excruciatingly aware that somebody knows somebody in this town, and it wasn't anybody that I know, that they could take that magnificent lake. Imagine Brightwater's Lake. Can you imagine filling that up and putting trucks in the parking lot? That's what they did to Kelly's Lake.
Didn't see it being filled in, but cried when it happened. I'm sorry, but it just seemed like they dumped dirt on all those memories. All those kids skating, playing tickly, fishing. I went fishing there, and the ducks and the swans, and just the feeling of community that was there. My father shoveling the ice and losing his sweater that my mother had made for him because he put it down for somebody to sit on, and the sweater disappeared. But the memories didn't. The memories stayed.
I knew something was happening when they took the boulevard, which is the Sunrise Highway now, and turned it into a tarred or concrete or whatever it's made out of, when that was turned from a dirt road into whatever it is, whatever you call it now. I knew that we had to be growing for them to do something like that.
After the war came something in West Islip that was out of this world, E.J. Corvette. You remember E.J. Corvette? The first type of discount. Big thing. You wanted to buy a bicycle, you no longer went to Morris Friedman, who sold bicycles on Main Street. Everything was cheaper in a discount house or whatever the case may be. Not only that, you didn't have to worry about finding a parking space. They had vast parking lots.
Malls have taken the heart and soul out of small town America to a degree. Pre-mall America, pre-war World War II America, everybody would know everybody else. People would shop on Main Street. People would know who all the shopkeepers were. They would go to their sons and daughters' weddings. They would be involved. There was real community. Everybody knew everybody in a nice way, though, not in a negative way, but in a nice way. Small town America was a wonderful place. That's been lost. I don't know how to ever get that back.
I do remember that, well, Main Street was the place to be. I mean, Main Street was where you did your Christmas shopping. As things developed on Sunrise Highway, shopping centers came in, then things started closing, and there started to be empty stores. And that goes all the way back to when I was in high school. There would be an empty store or two. I don't think I maybe verbalized it, but I can remember that it started then.
I don't remember when the shopping centers near the McDonald's were built, but the first strip malls were built. Instead of having a freestanding bohack on Main Street in Bayshore, there were larger supermarkets built in strip malls that people would go to, and it just changed the nature of all of Main Street and where people would take their business.
The most significant event that people remember regarding the demise of Bayshore is when Governor Hugh Carey, ostensibly to put people, mainstream the mental patients, which I think was a euphemism for cutting the budget, decided to take them all out of the Suffolk County psychiatric facilities and put them downtown.
And that combined with some economic factors that were happening at the time, with the economy and a rise in crime, the emergence of crack, of cocaine in this area, really ended up bringing a lot of social problems into Bayshore.
So there was a lot of, let's say, undesirable scenery. Guys sitting on the street or urinating in the road or drunk and disorderly. And a lot of this went on in the front of these retail stores where you would go into a shoe store and there'd be a guy laying on the sidewalk in front of it. And boy, it didn't take long before there was nobody going downtown Bayshore.
The movie houses closed, the stores moved up to the Sunrise Highway, and we had a demise.
It was heartbreaking, and there was a bit of anger in it. How could we allow this to happen? And then, resolving not to go on Main Street anymore. If this is what they want Bayshore to be, then I don't want to be part of it.
To see our town just go down so rapidly, it went down and we didn't even realize it was going down until it hit almost bottom.
It was disheartening because, even though I was very young when the downtown started its decline, it was still Main Street. It was still the mecca. It was still the hub.
It's very hard because my people have always lived here. I know nowhere else. And to see the ground cut right from under us.
Everybody was negative. Oh no, it'll never come back. There's too much to do. It's too down. There's the dummy blockers. Everything's boarded up. It's just so depressing. Who wants to go there? So just wait. Just wait.
It was the people of Bayshore who stood up and said, well, you know, we have to, if the solution isn't coming from anywhere else, we have to stand up and do it ourselves.
When things get bad enough, even people can't stand each other, we'll work together for the common good. By the early 90s, Bayshore had hit rock bottom. Many people had tried many solutions, but a defining moment came when the new superintendent of the schools convened the Bayshore Summit, which galvanized the community towards downtown revitalization.
It really gave the community a chance to find out and what their vision and what Bayshore could be.
I've been to every summit meeting and I could see the changes. And there was so much enthusiasm coming from Donna Perricone. I mean, how could you not help but get caught up in it with her enthusiasm for it? And the way she was able to get people to contribute and participate.
People came to Bayshore, and people are coming back to Bayshore for its beautiful bays, its beautiful houses, but even more so for its indefinable sense of place, and because it's a community where people care.
People are coming back that have moved away. Oh, Bayshore, wow, it's incredible what's been done here.
You know, as long as you've got people who have the desire to make positive change, as long as you have, you know, your government officials who are, you know, make it their ambition to see that, you know, positive changes take place in Bayshore. I don't see anything but positive and bright things for this community.
And you can see it now. And I'm to these naysayers, I'm saying, nah, I told you.
When I think of the future of Bayshore, I see a community that's ideally suited for this century. It is a community of diversity. It is a community of history. It is a community of beauty.
I believe that the future for Bayshore is a model of progress, a model of hope, a model of the spirit of the people who live here.
We all take pride in our hometown. I mean, that's only natural because all of our people's been there, our schools have been there. Everything that we hold dear to us has been part of it. This town has been part of it.
pleased that you thought to include me in this, because I really feel that my heart is in Bayshore and that I'm part of it.